Nicholas Zabladell, and this is a weekly update. This is my take on what's going on in the world. You can take it or leave it. I am finally back to give you guys all an update on what has been going on this week, and it has been an interesting one. And to help me unpack is Jerome Bruss. Thank you for coming to help me with this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be here, Nick. Thanks.
So we're first going to start out with Trump's nomination for the Supreme Court, who is Brett Kavanaugh. He apparently, according to the political left, is the worst thing for America. And I don't know if you share that same sentiment, Jerry, but you hear the Democratic senators, they actually had a statement that they announced, saying that it's going to ruin healthcare in the United States. Women are going to lose their rights, blah, 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 that sort of stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing it. Some of it holds water, but a lot of it for me is whenever I see anything that's been released by either side in the last, I would say 6 months or so, I always bear in mind with like the framing that an election is coming up.
Right.
So whatever they're saying, they're just trying to rile whoever their base supporters are up and get them to show up to vote. So some of it might be a little bit of hyperbole and stretching it just to kind of make people are, prone to go out and do something about it. But,
right.
Some of the points that they're bringing up, I can kind of see it's kind of right in between for me. There's a couple issues that, kind of stand out to me about Kavanaugh.
Okay, well, I have actually the Democratic senators. It's Chuck Schumer, Kamala Harris, and then Senator Blumenthal. I'm going to play this clip here quick.
Yeah.
Now, last night, President Trump took a step that millions of Americans feared he would take and nominated to the Supreme Court someone who would fill his campaign promise to overturn Roe and declare health care for Americans unconstitutional.
Listen, if you are a young woman in America or you care about a young woman in America, pay close attention to this nomination. Pay close attention. Because Kavanaugh has made his purpose clear. He told us that when he was on that list of 25. He has told us that in every decision that he has made on the issue of choice. And let's be clear about what this is about. It's about government taking on the decision about a woman and what she does with her body instead of giving that woman and her family and her God the power to make the decision for herself.
Judge Kavanaugh, you don't belong in this building as a justice. Judge Kavanaugh, you should not be serving in this building as a Supreme Court justice because you have demonstrated an extraordinary hostility to the rights and liberties precious in this country that make this nation great. I'm a no on this nominee.
So obviously we get the whole, I probably should have paused it, but you get the gist of it. They're obviously inherently opposed to it because they think that Kavanaugh is going to overturn Roe. He's going to make healthcare unconstitutional, which I don't honestly understand, how that makes much sense, saying healthcare is unconstitutional. I mean, obviously it's not, it's not explicitly stated as a right in the Constitution, but, to me, it seems like the Democrats, and, you kind of touched on this, they're kind of getting, all, riled up, just to get their base fired up for, the election here. And I mean, if they're going to try and, hold off and hope that they win in November to get justice of their own, I mean, I don't know if, they're going to be able to do that, especially with Mitch McConnell being able to use the nuclear option. He's going to have to hope, or Chuck Schumer's going to have to hope that at least one Republican goes off and opposes. And from my understanding is that there is Lisa Murkowski and then one other senator who are, moderate Republicans and sometimes vote, liberal. and they have the I believe they're up for election, so they might be in an interesting spot to either vote against it or vote for it, and that might cost them the election. So I don't know if it's going to be a smart decision for Republicans to push this too hard, especially considering how Kavanaugh really isn't the like Antonin Scalia or Robert Bork type justice. He seems more of a moderate to me.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of seen the same sentiment, especially as I was kind of researching, kind of seen on both sides, when I was researching Kavanaugh more in depth. But with Kavanaugh, just in general, because I think, Democrats, like voters, I mean, when they kind of come up with these excuses, and then of course it gets poked fun at with that Twitter trending, about stories, not to confirm them, so a lot of the excuses do seem like, Democrats are being sore losers, but I mean, they are, some of the reasons are, but at the same time, it was majority, from what I can see, especially in this last election with Hillary winning with 3 million more votes, is that majority of the people here don't want Roe v. Wade overturned.
Right.
They don't want some of these things happening. And so it's like, they could argue that the Republicans took control or took advantage of some of the laws to regain power, to keep power, because the democratic system wasn't working in their favor. Right.
Well, and see, I don't know if you had seen Kavanaugh's speech after Trump had announced him, but one of the words he said was, he wanted to maintain precedent, and Ben Shapiro actually kind of broke, his speech down, and I actually want to play that here, because Kavanaugh wants, he doesn't seem like the type of person to rock the boat. He's more of like an incrementalist. So I'm just going to play that video from Ben Shapiro here quick.
Brett Kavanaugh gets up. Brett Kavanaugh, of course, from the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. We've discussed his credentials in the past. We've also discussed some of the shortcomings in his record. We'll talk about what he's going to do for the Supreme Court in just a second. He did a little speech. The president ushered him up to the podium. And then Brett Kavanaugh came forward, and everybody went, "Oh, my God, that's Brett Kavanaugh's music." And then he sort of charged forward to the microphone. And then he proceeded to give a speech about his background and his past, and then his judicial philosophy. Here's what he had to say about his judicial philosophy.
My judicial philosophy is straightforward. A judge must be independent and must interpret the law, not make the law. A judge must interpret statutes as written, and a judge must interpret the Constitution as written, informed by history and tradition and precedent.
Okay, the reason that he adds precedent right there is because precedent is a fudge word. If he had just said a judge must interpret the Constitution as written, informed by history and tradition, we'd all say, great, that's Thomas's standard, that's Scalia's standard. By adding the word precedent, he allows himself a little bit of wiggle room, so when people on the left say, well, you'd overrule Roe v. Wade, wouldn't you? He'd say, well, listen, precedent is still precedent. Precedent is a legal fudge word, and Kavanaugh is fond of using it. I think that Kavanaugh is, in short, a stand-up double for the president. I'm not sure that he's a home run for the president. I think there are a lot of good things about Kavanaugh. I think that Trump could have gone for broke. He decided not to. But what Kavanaugh had to say in his speech last night was exactly right. He talks about how he taught at Harvard Law School. He was actually appointed well.
So, yeah, you see, I think that Kavanaugh is more of like a, like I said, don't rock the boat type of person. He's going to definitely try and, I guess, maintain the peace is the best way to put it. Because, when he's, says precedent like that, he's kind of like trying to win over Democrats and say, I'm not going to overturn Roe v. Wade because, it was already ruled by, a previous Supreme Court. So I don't know if you got that also.
I mean, I got the same kind of, sentiment about it. But what I kind of, realized, though, when he was making that, initial opening speech is that he says something to the tune of, a judge must interpret the law, not make the law.
Right.
So I don't know if it's semantics or not, but, these Supreme Court appointees are justices. They're not judges.
Right.
So they're essentially, they're lawyers, or
right.
interpreters. So they don't really have, not even interpret, that's not the right word. they're lawyers, or scholars.
They determine the constitutionality of a law,
Right,
if it's
so
constitutional.
that's where that precedent comes in, and he gives himself wiggle room. So to me, it was almost misleading saying he's just gonna, he's a judge, so he needs to interpret it. No, like you're a Supreme Court justice, you have a lot of wiggle room to kind of, vote along with what you feel the Constitution says. So it might just be semantics, but I think he kind of chose the wrong word because he's not a Supreme Court judge,
Well, right. But then again, okay, so I was actually going to ask you this. Do you believe that precedent should play a role in determining, the constitutions or the constitutionality of certain laws? So like if another instance of like a Roe v. Wade were to come up and, should Roe v. Wade be used as precedent or something along, another law or case similar to a previous one, should the previous law be used as a basis for that law?
I mean, I would say so, but not like just set in stone to like, well, there was Roe v. Wade and that was ruled in this favor, so there's no change there. Because I do believe, that the Constitution is a living and breathing document, as they say. So as, tides change or people's perceptions or ideals change, that it should be reflected in, how the Supreme Court justices rule on certain topics.
Okay.
So it gets to the point of where, everybody's kind of leaning towards more of the states' rights on Roe v. Wade, then obviously that should translate into, getting those justices appointed. It's very, very murky, but I do believe in, the general idea of it, though.
Okay. Yeah, because, I mean, I do believe that precedent should play a role, but it shouldn't be like the deciding factor, because if that were the case, I mean, Plessy versus Ferguson, it allowed the Jim Crow laws to become constitutional, and the separate but equal led essentially to the segregation of blacks.
Yeah.
And then we would not have gotten the Civil Rights Act in the the 60s.
I don't remember the case, but it was same with like the Japanese internment camps. Those were legal.
The Korematsu case.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. That's like exactly the point. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, if you were to say that were the case, could you later, you could go back and say, well, should we start segregating blacks or put Japanese in internment camps? So, yeah, I really find it interesting because, there are people on both sides of the aisle that want to use precedent, but then they'll say, oh, it shouldn't apply to, certain cases.
Right, when it's inconvenient.
Right. And, I don't think that, because when I look at Kavanaugh's, I really haven't done a lot of research, but when I've looked at his, his ideological beliefs and like his, judicial record, it does definitely seem like he's not, one to just, make wide, general, or jurisdiction or judicial orders, I guess is the best way to put it. He's more of the tight, narrow, get down to, this specific case. And actually Ben Shapiro in that, in the complete episode of that show that I had just played, he says, that might actually play a role in the reasoning why he was an appellate judge, because, an appellate judge, they're not going to make, broad, judicial orders or rulings. They're going to focus just on that individual case.
Right.
So I want to say that considering how Kavanaugh obviously is more of a, I guess, originalist or constitutional judge instead, because I honestly think that there are two types of judges or nominees for the Supreme Court. You get the activist judges, which is the term the right uses to say like Sonia Sotomayor or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the more liberal type of judges. And then you get the more conservative or constitutionalist. They're the more rigid, interpreters of the Constitution, like Clarence Thomas or, the late Antonin Scalia. But I definitely think that Kavanaugh will be more of a middle of the road type of justice. And I don't know. I don't know if you see that or not.
It's tough to see. It's tough to really say because, you can look back at some of his track records on some things, and he seems a little bit more. I mean, for the one that I kind of pulled up here with the abortion rights, I'm looking at a New York Times article, and when he had that voted to allow an undocumented 17-year-old immigrant to seek an abortion, he wrote the dissent, but he was just saying part of, that there should be reasonable regulations that don't impose an undue burden.
Right.
Something to the effect that, there should be a wait time to get somebody to help represent her. I forgot what the word he had used.
Like an escort almost.
Sponsor, there you go, with their immigration sponsor before making such a serious decision.
Yep.
So he kind of went right in between, but then, it's just, he could be in the middle, but it's hard to say because, when he gets in front of the Senate, for or meeting with them, everybody knows that he's not going to be able to answer questions on specific cases, or he's just don't want to, so it's, you can kind of look back at his history, but then that kind of also questions too, which, we talked about in the past, but to the effect of, that Trump and, his administration kind of wanted to go for like an outsider, and non-mainstream, and it's the mainstream Republicans or, stuff like that. Like, well, Kavanaugh worked for the Bush administration, so as the word's missing, but like the mainstream, like they're the
establishment.
There you go, establishment. Yeah. So that kind of threw me off, but it's like, just from studying it these past years, Trump is never consistent anyway. So it's
right.
Really, his supporters don't care anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I found that part interesting too.
and I was really honestly surprised that he had went with this pick because I was expecting more of like I don't want to say, like a Mike Lee type, but just, like you had said, a non-establishment or a Washington insider type.
Right.
And, granted, I mean, who else could he have picked besides, there was Mike Lee and then his brother who was on the Utah Supreme Court. But I mean, there was really not much, there really wasn't much else in terms of like Washington outsider, in my opinion. I mean, yeah. I don't remember the list of the people that he had off the top of my head, but I do know that, in terms of like, just the quality of judges that he had, I would say that, Kavanaugh is probably somewhere towards the middle at best. In terms of like, if you were a GOP supporter, he would be middle of the road at best.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's what I was kind of realizing too. I was going through it. It's like his credentials are pretty great. You know what?
Right.
It was Yale Law School, Yale College, former clerk for Kennedy. Same as Justice Gorsuch as well. So it's like his credentials are there. It's really a tough thing for Democrats to push back on.
Right. But this is the problem with doing a Supreme Court nomination now is that, it always used to be based on credentials. Granted, I don't think if you were just a clerk the whole time, you shouldn't be. You should obviously have some legal experience, whether it be a lawyer or a judge. But, now it's to the point where it's completely partisan. I mean, that was the only reason why Garland was not, even he wasn't even given a hearing.
And that was a big part with Garland too, is because from what I had researched, it was, Garland was right in the middle. It was essentially from a list that the GOP gave out, and several GOP senators, agreed with it. I don't have that article pulled up. I thought I did. But, there were several. I know it was Orrin Hatch was the big one. He supported it. And then as the time got closer, then, that's when he doubled down along with McConnell and said, no, we're going to wait until after the election.
Right.
So it was like, well, it had it there. And it was like, I think that's what Obama had in mind was to put, conservatives in a tough spot because he could have offered a lot more liberal judges.
Right.
I don't know off the top of my head, but he got one that was fairly in the middle that most people would argue was a centrist, but yet, like you just said, they didn't even give him a hearing.
Right.
They gave him nothing.
Well, that's the unfortunate part about, our political system is because, now that the Republicans did that to Garland, the Democrats are turning around and doing this. Well, they want to do the same thing to Kavanaugh, and they wanted to do that to Gorsuch because, especially now with Kavanaugh, they're saying, well, we've got an election here in, what is it, like 4 months? They're saying, oh, we've got a midterm coming up. Why don't we wait? Because the Senate might not even be the same. So we want to make sure, we're not making a rash decision that'll affect the Supreme Court for an ungodly amount of time, which, I mean, I honestly thought that, if they had given Garland a hearing back when Obama was president, he probably would not have been confirmed. That's just me. But if they're going to keep playing this game, we're never going to get anywhere in terms of having, Supreme Court nominations or confirmation hearings on, president's cabinet.
Right.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and that's a tough part. Like we had talked before, like nobody wants to do the right thing at this point. And that was, I remember reading some articles prior to the nomination when Kavanaugh's name was getting thrown out there. And, some of the strategists of the conservatives that I was reading, or conservative strategists, people were saying not to nominate him because he has such a long track record and rulings and opinions that it could get drug out. There's so many. He had like 300, I think it was, 300 opinions or rulings or something like that.
Yep.
There's all those questions relating back to when he first was nominated. It took him 3 years back in 2003 to get to the federal appeals court. So there's just a lot of history that, rightfully so, that the Senate's going to want to comb through, and get a better idea on. So it's like, that's going to be another drawn out battle again too, that could take them into October, which, nobody wanted. They wanted to be approved beforehand. The conservatives wanted to be approved beforehand.
And speaking of long drawn out battles, we are going to kind of shift gears here. And I know you were going to enjoy talking about this, but we're going to move on to the Peter Strzok congressional hearing that happened yesterday. And it was a mess, to say the least. I mean, I had read an article on CNN today, and I don't know if you had read it, but it was titled "Congress Embarrassed Itself During the Strzok Hearing." And it essentially goes on to say, Republicans, they made themselves look like fools, and Democrats, I mean, they didn't help it any better, but, it's not like they were, people completely in the right either. In the article, they say that we had 3 separate parties: Republicans, Democrats, and Strzok, and they were all talking over each other, trying to essentially win the upper hand. And it just made it look like, I forget who had said it, but someone said it looked like a bar fight because of how petty it was.
Yeah, it got. There's a lot of ad hominem out there,
right.
Especially the gentleman from Texas,
Louis Gohmert.
Yeah. He had a bit out there.
In fact, I was going to say, because CNN's article wasn't entirely wrong, because they had said that somewhere in the article, I'm not going to look through the whole thing, but they had said something along those lines. They also talked about Trey Gowdy, who was essentially, throwing out his little, snarky remarks, and, Strzok essentially wasn't having any of it because, the way CNN made it sound is that the Republicans were out for blood regardless of if, they were in the right or not. And, that just goes to show you that, regardless of the outcome of the Trump-Russia investigation, both sides are going to disagree with it, depending on how it comes out.
Yeah, definitely so. And that's where I think a lot of this, it really is just political, a show at this point, because, just to preface the whole, what was the point of, Peter Strzok actually being there? What were they really trying to get out of it besides just kind of smearing him and, discounting or undermining the FBI? Because if or when, the FBI and Department of Justice come out with a report that is damning to President Trump, then they can go out and say, no, FBI is the deep state, it's corrupt, remember those text messages, and, and just run on it, which resonates fairly well with, at least Trump's base supporters. And then it's going to be rough, it's going to be rough either way, like you're saying.
Well, and see, granted, I honestly don't want to buy into the whole, deep state, conspiracy theory. But at the same time, when I was looking through the bits and pieces of the hearing, I could definitely see, where the Republicans were coming from. And, I honestly do, in my personal opinion, I do believe that Strzok was someone who, whether it be implicit or explicit, was, biased against, the Trump campaign and, using his political beliefs, in favor of Hillary Clinton. Because, let me pull up, this was one of the interactions that Strzok had with Louis Gohmert, and I'm just going to play the first couple minutes of it. It's essentially, Gohmert was grilling him on the emails that Strzok had access to that were on Hillary's unauthorized server. So I'm just going to play that quick.
That'd be right here. Sir Strzok, you said earlier in this hearing you were concerned about a hostile foreign power affecting our election. Do you recall the Intelligence Community Inspector General, Chuck McCulloch, having an investigation into an anomaly found on Hillary Clinton's emails?
I do not.
Well, let me refresh your recollection. The Intelligence Community Inspector General, Chuck McCulloch, sent his investigator, Frank Rucker, along with an IG attorney, Jeanette McMillan, to brief you and Dean Chappelle and two other FBI personnel that I won't name at this time about an anomaly they had found on Hillary Clinton's emails that were going to and from the private unauthorized server that you were supposed to be investigating. Now, do you remember it?
I remember meeting Mr. Rucker on either one or two occasions. I do not remember the specific content or discussions.
Well, I'll help you with that too then. Mr. Rucker reported to those of you, the four of you there, in the presence of the IG attorney, that they had found this anomaly on Hillary Clinton's emails going through a private server. And when they had done the forensic analysis, they found that her emails, every single one except for four, over 30,000 of them, were going to an address that was not on the distribution list. It was a compartmentalized bit of information that was sending it to an unauthorized source. Do you recall that?
Sir, I don't.
Well, he went on to explain it, and you didn't say anything.
No.
You thanked him, you shook his hand, but the problem was that it was going to an unauthorized source that was a foreign entity unrelated to Russia, and from what you've said here, you did nothing more than nod and shake the man's hand when you didn't seem to be all that concerned about our national integrity of our election when it was involving Hillary Clinton. So,
okay, so pretty much what Louis Gohmert was saying was, Strzok was given the information regarding Hillary's emails, and, he essentially did nothing with it. And, I guess the point Republicans were trying to make, and, I don't think they hit it very well on the head, but the point they were trying to make, or I hope they were trying to make at least, was that between Strzok not acting on that information, plus the emails, or plus the text messages between him and Lisa Page, and then on top of that, also being involved with the Trump-Russia investigation, they're saying that there is too much, or, it's too much for this to be a coincidence. And, I'm not going to sit here and say that the Republicans were, definitely any better in regards to, I definitely think that they were trying to smear Peter Strzok. But, it's really concerning for me to, hear that. I don't know if you had heard, had gotten a hold of that information.
So specifically what the representative, I keep forgetting his name,
Louis Gohmert,
was talking about. I don't know much around the details of that.
Right.
When I was listening to that was kind of the first time I had heard it, but still just trying to analyze around it. So, he's trying to, smear him, saying that, that Peter Strzok was, trying to sway the election towards Hillary, which if that was the case, he did a pretty horrible job.
Right.
Especially being the fact that Peter Strzok helped co-write the Senate letter that he sent out to people, the October surprise. He helped write it. So, if he was totally biased, and he wanted Hillary to win, why would he help write that, Senate letter that immediately got leaked and, from several analysis that I've seen, helps sway the election the other direction?
Right. Well,
plus, I was going to say too, real quick, it's just I did some research on what Peter Strzok was, beforehand, and he was pretty amazing, or he was, a part of that Operation Ghost Stories, so essentially uncovering secret Russian sleeper cell agents. So this guy, he's done a lot of work, and he not handily, but he oversaw it all. And then now it's now he's trying to say that, so is he working with Russia to do this? It's he hates Russians. He said it in text messages, and in reference to his text, he said disparaging things about my boy Bernie. He said bad things about a lot of people, but it was just so convenient that they only pluck out, what they talked about Donald.
Right.
So it's rough.
And my honest opinion is that, there is so much corruption in the government, and I don't want to say that, everyone is, being bought out by someone else, but you really have to, it really makes you wonder, are people in the government, whether it be, the people in Congress, administrators, in certain, government agencies, like DOJ, the EPA, HHS, all of them, are they really out for, are they looking out for, the interests of the average American person? Because, when you look at, it goes back to the deep state, sort of deal. I don't want to buy into it, but then again, at the same time, it's people, not specifically Peter Strzok, but, to me, he definitely, smells of, corruption. But, there are definitely instances where it makes me wonder, are there people that want to, like I said, are they looking out for, the interests of the American people?
Yeah, and that was a very valid question, and I think that's why the Inspector General definitely looked into it. And we all know how that report came out, saying yes, he had, appearance of bias, so there was bias, but he didn't act on it.
But
so it's he's texting his girlfriend, whatever he wants, and he kind of put it in perspective on a couple of the comments during the Senate hearing yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
But it's I think we were talking about it the other day too, is what do you do then? So these FBI agents can't have a political opinion, or if they can have one, they just can't get caught expressing it to other people.
Well, and I think that it would have been different, and actually a lot different, if you ask me, if he had not used his, the FBI phone, because that's actually comparable to the United States military. When you sign up and enlist in the military, you can't essentially you can't express your political beliefs, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't know, how it's worded exactly, but they say that when you join the military, you essentially give up your rights to express your political beliefs. And I can't say if the FBI is the same way, but, I definitely think that it would have played out differently if Strzok had used, let's say, for instance, his private phone. Because I was actually going to play this here, and, I'll let you have another comment before I do. But Trey Gowdy asked him, if you had the appearance of bias, doesn't that mean you were biased? For him to say, they let me go from the Mueller investigation because I appeared to be biased. Well, doesn't that mean you were biased?
Right.
So,
And that's, and that's where it all kind of becomes, again, like a little bit murky, because I could, looking at it from the idea of keeping an image, so if he did leave this Peter Strzok guy on with the team, and they come out with the report, yet again, now they're going to say, oh, there was, a corrupted person in this FBI, none of it can be trusted.
Right.
Push it through. So what Robert Mueller does and goes, well, being a seasoned lawyer himself and prosecuting people, he goes, no, just get it out of here.
Cut him loose.
It's unfortunate because, like we had just talked about, Peter Strzok was the number one guy. He's the head of counterintelligence agency against Russia.
Right.
He was the perfect guy for this.
Right.
But he made some stupid mistakes. So I don't disagree with him not being taken out. But
yeah, well, and obviously people have their own beliefs one way or another, but I don't want to say I kind of feel sorry for him, but at the same time, it's like, to me, it seems like he did it to himself. I mean, right. I don't know if you feel that way, but like when you look at, cause like he said he had those text messages, and Lisa Page was like, oh, what if he becomes president? And then he says, don't worry, I have an insurance policy or something like that. Even for, I don't know if you felt like that, but didn't you feel slightly concerned that, someone who was working on, like the investigations like that, didn't that seem slightly concerning to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely ominous. And then, and it kind of seems, strange or concerning. But then I kind of think back is like, well, what is Trey Gowdy and what are these other people, conservatives typically?
Like, what are their motivations?
Like for evidence that it actually did anything, or where was the actual bias?
Right.
And I mean, especially to Trey Gowdy, it's like, he's saying, oh, appearance of bias. Was there, was he biased in his Benghazi investigation? So, like, of course, he was just as biased potentially too. It's kind of like just trying to go at the hypocritical end of, when he was coming out there rambunctiously and I don't give a damn.
Gunning for Hillary.
Right. So it's, I don't know. That's a tough one. But I mean, I definitely see where they're coming from, but then I just kind of lean on that that Inspector General's report to see, what facts and evidence they actually found.
Right.
If there's an absence of evidence,
but
they really don't have much of a leg to stand on.
Right. Well, and then, if you really want to be a cynic, you could be like, well, is the Inspector General really, nonpartisan, or, does he have his own biases?
Yeah. And it's tough to combat all that stuff because it's, Robert Mueller is the registered Republican, and then Chris Wray, who was selected by, by the president himself. So It's like, there's so many Republicans surrounding the Russia investigation. And then to come back and say, because of one person, the whole FBI is corrupt. Well, it's probably not one person, but, 2 people.
Right.
The whole FBI is corrupted. And James Comey was a Republican as well.
Well, and then there was also a rumor that, since Jeff Sessions had recused himself from the investigation, they're like, oh, well, what information does he have on the Trump-Russia investigation? It's like, you honestly can't say until, and, it's difficult to say because Mueller, he still hasn't released anything, and he hasn't said if he's done or not. So
absolutely, and and I don't want to get too far back into like Kavanaugh, but that was like the biggest thing that was trying to eat at me or getting at me is that idea of that he wants to change it. It was in some 2009 law review article saying something to the tune of that, like, no sitting president should be like investigated or tried or anything because it's too distracting towards, his presidency.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I also heard something along those lines that, Trump was putting him on the Supreme Court just to protect himself.
And it's like, I don't know if it's too conspiratorial, but it seems like there could have been other better picks. And this guy still happens to potentially protect yourself when just a few months ago he was saying that, investigating or insisting that he can pardon himself.
Yeah.
So that's like I kind of come into a little bit with agreement with Kavanaugh on that note, but a little different. I would agree that maybe the president shouldn't be indicted, but they should definitely be able to be investigated. So they should be able to be subpoenaed and like go in front of a grand jury or in front of a special counsel, but no, a sitting president I don't think should be indicted for several reasons. But, who's to say that, he should be impeached and then indicted? That's something I could agree with.
Well, and see, people, they keep calling for the impeachment claims, but they need to realize that the Constitution explicitly says that, a president can only be impeached for, high misdemeanors, treason, or bribery. Well, as of now, no charges have been brought against Donald Trump.
Right.
So, he can't be impeached for anything other than that.
Right. They have to kind of wait around to see. I mean, a high misdemeanor was, Bill Clinton lying to
investigators.
Investigators about his extramarital affairs with his secretary.
Right.
So it's like, that's also fairly loose interpretation, which again, you're packing somebody who was selected, by the president himself, and then he kind of has a somewhat wishy-washy opinion on if a president can be investigated or indicted during his presidency. So it's a good pick for Trump, personally.
Right. Well, see, only time will tell.
Right.
I mean, you got to expect, one way or the other if he gets nominated. If it were, because I'm not going to get too much into the conspiracy theories here, but if you assume that he gets nominated or confirmed by the Senate, Trump bought him out or got him on board because of the non-indictment claims.
Right.
Can you honestly say that Trump is doing this just to shore up his base, or is he picking the right person that he believes is for the the right person for the right job?
Yeah, and it's tough because, like I was just saying to you before too, it's like Kavanaugh's credentials are pretty good. His credentials are there, but then it's like some of these types of things, it's like, well, and then he kind of conversed or got almost approval from Justice Kennedy, about this Supreme Court pick, and it all just seems too perfect. And the one report I had read, I think it was a Washington Post article that is, saying something to the tune of like he had to get like the stamp of approval, before Kennedy said, yeah, okay, I'll retire. He already knew who was going to get picked before he retired.
Right.
Like gave the go ahead and said, all right, yep, I'll retire now then.
Right. Well, and you got to realize that there's also probably, I'd say, 2 more justices that would either, unfortunately pass away or step down. I mean, there's Clarence Thomas, and then there's Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Right.
So, assuming Trump wins in 2020, he could potentially have, 2 more Supreme Court justice picks.
Right.
And, it obviously will have to depend on midterm and, lower ballot elections in 2020, but, he could definitely shore up, the Supreme Court for the Republicans, or he could just throw in a mix of, moderates to, I guess, completely screw with people. So
yeah, it's unpredictable. You really don't know with him. That's true.
But yeah, I mean, at this point, I honestly can't say. I do know that we are kind of running out of time here, though, so we're gonna have to cut it off here. It was nice to have you on, Jerry. We're gonna.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna have to. I know I'm gonna have you on again, and I'm actually gonna have to do this a little more often because this is like the first time I've done it in a month. But on that note, I am gonna be cutting us off here. As I will talk to you guys all later. Thank you, Jerry.
Thanks, Nick. Talk to you soon.